Welcome to the Business as Mission podcast, dedicated to those who long to see God glorified in business and the nations reached for Christ. Your host is Mike Bayer, longtime BAM leader and founder of Third Path Initiative, an online education resource for starting and growing BAM businesses around the world.
So welcome to another episode of the Business as Mission podcast. We lovingly call this BAM Stories because that's just what it is. It's just stories of people that are bringing their business to bear on the different issues that face the world: spiritual, societal, financial, ecological. It's just a beautiful thing to think about how business can have such a positive impact on the world. And today our guests are from a company called Super Green Solutions. We've got Dan Dubell and Garry McDowall. We were just talking about what's going on around the world this way and franchising in the space that we're in, but also just making a difference where we are, where God's placed us right now. So guys, first of all, welcome to the program. Really glad we could finally get this going.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Mike. We're excited.
Yeah, thank you, Mike, for having us.
So just as we were talking about, this is really a loose conversation. I kind of imagine it'd be the thing we do in a coffee shop somewhere. And one of us would say, hey, tell me your story, right? Just how did you get to where you are? And then, where are you going? It's always the way I like to do this. And so, you guys, you didn't start this company. You actually acquired this company and you did things and you're doing things with it from that perspective. So I guess start with a little background on just who you guys are. Who is Dan Dubell? Who is Garry McDowall? And how did you guys get together?
Well, that's an exciting story. Gary's is more interesting than mine, but basically I've been in business, 40 some years. My background has mostly to do with building businesses and building culture. I worked in franchising with PepsiCo, which ultimately became Yum Brands, and worked in the Taco Bell division, worked for a franchisee that we helped take from 13 to 56 stores in just 2 years. From there, went into business for myself and ultimately got into buying 2 franchises, which I still currently own with other partners. One is a business brokerage and one is a promotional products business. And so the franchisor that we had those 2 franchises with actually approached me about buying one of the brands that they had, Super Green, that they had for 10 years and had not been successful with. And because they knew that we were doing things in business as missions around the world, and the owner there is a leader, he reached out and said, hey, would you be interested in buying this? And really it started just to buy an area and then a region and then ultimately the whole company. And so we said no several times until we realized that maybe the Lord was in this, and we explored it a little bit more closely and ended up buying it during the pandemic at the end of 2020. And to transition over to Garry now, Garry and I had not known each other previously. We were introduced actually through an acquaintance that probably people in this program will be familiar with, Don Simmons. Don Simmons and Dick Widener and Stan Bachman are business partners of ours. And so Don Simmons introduced Garry and I when we were in the due diligence process, and that was in December of 2020, literally less than a month prior to us buying the company. And so I'll let Garry share his background and talk about it from there.
Yeah, I have to interject. So Don Simmons is probably one of the most networked people on the planet. If there's ever a definition of a connector, it would be Don. Don's an upcoming guest on the show as well, promoting his new book, fantastic book. So when you mention his name, like, well, of course, that's who connected you. Yeah, Garry's got it in hand. So Garry, what your side of this equation? You get introduced to Dan through Don, and what happens next?
Yeah, so Don had contacted me specifically because of my background in franchising. And I think, just historically for me, after I graduated with a 2 degrees in nuclear disarmament, I decided to go into business instead of pursue that career. And because I had come to faith at the same time. And I was blessed with the privilege of being on the ground floor, helping to start a company called St. Louis Bread. You would know it today as Panera Bread Company. And was in the industry for about 17 years. Had good stints with Panera, also with Tim Hortons, a bakery cafe chain out of Canada, helped them to come into the U.S. market. And even at one point was on the board of the same company that Dan was working with, PepsiCo. 2003, felt a call to move overseas with my family as a kingdom entrepreneur. And developed several businesses. A couple of them are a franchise model that are one that's in 37 countries today. Not all owners are kingdom builders, but significant ones are throughout the former Soviet Union and Europe. And moved back to the U.S. in 2020, and was just trying to determine, what's next step for me. Don and I have done business together and ministry together in Vietnam and also currently in Georgia, Republic of Georgia, and introduced Dan and I. And it was just interesting. First time that I had met a man that, like me, was an ordained pastor, like me, has been in business and food service background as well, which was quite interesting. And we do so many things, theologically well aligned, philosophically well aligned. So we actually saw in that meeting in December that it was divine providence.
Yeah, well, that's a good word for it. I mean, it's interesting because I've never met either one of you in person for any length of time, but I've talked with you several times, either on Zoom or some other pandemic technology where we've been connected because we have a lot of mutual acquaintances and friends in the business mission space. I got to ask you, what is it about, and maybe it's different for both of you, what is it about Super Green that attracted you in the first place? And you said no. So Dan, you said no repeatedly. So something kept pulling you back.
Yeah. And honestly, if we had, a couple hours, I could tell you the fuller story, but honestly, we originally looked at the franchise because we have a business in India that we were involved in. And we thought, man, could this help out that work in India? And we went and looked at it as a franchise concept. And we realized that it couldn't work because it was more of a remote tribal type area. And this just wasn't the right concept. And again, that was in February of 2020, right before, literally the pandemic blew up on us. And so after we walked away from that, they came back and said, look, we know you weren't interested in a single franchise. We'll give you a great deal on all of Northeastern India. And again, that's probably now March or April when the world's going upside down because of the pandemic. And I'm like, what are you guys, crazy? No, we're not interested in, Northeast India. So they took that and came back another month later and said, well, we know you weren't interested in the single franchise or in the northeastern part of India, but why don't you buy the whole country of India from us? To which I told them, you guys are more nuts than I realized. And then they were actually more nutty than that because they came back then in the summer of 2020 and approached me and said, hey, we got even a better idea. Why don't you just buy the whole company? And literally, I had a call with them on a Monday that I was planning to tell them, look, we're not interested. And since you can't offer me anything more than the whole franchise, leave me alone now. And just through a series of God events, conversations that I had with Dick Widener and Stan Bachman on Friday, we decided that Monday, instead of me telling them no, that we needed to at least see if God was in this and start exploring it. And that's what happened. And so literally, it was not what I had intended, what I wanted, or what I went after. But God said, no, this is what you're going to do. And so we literally explored it. And what we found through our due diligence was a company that had literally been in existence almost 25 years because it was founded in Australia, had moved to the U.S. Actually, in 1997, it was founded in Australia, moved to the U.S. in 2010 and opened its first location. This franchisor saw it, liked it, bought the company, and for the next 10 years tried to make it work, and it didn't work. And so they were at a place where they weren't going to invest any more money, and so they wanted to sell it off. And so basically, we bought it for, what we feel was a very reasonable price, and we set out to not only rebrand it, because we totally rebranded the concept, same name, but all the imagery and all was different in the messaging. And then we also built all the infrastructure that was lacking, which was a big part of why they weren't successful in the past. So we spent literally almost the first whole year where we did what they tell you not to do in franchising, and we stopped selling franchises because we were not about to sell something that we couldn't honor God in selling to a person and believing that we could make them successful in that business. So we literally stopped. And obviously that meant we burned through a lot of capital in order to rebuild this and get this, to a place where we could honor God and how we move forward as a franchise. And so we started in the fall of 2021, starting to sell off franchises. And quite honestly, there were some franchisees that were previously with the brand that we needed to help exit the company because it wasn't best for them. And we weren't going to continue to keep them in a long-term relationship where they were financially committed when it wasn't best for them. So we graciously helped a number of them move on from the company.
So let me before you jump in here, Gary, let me take a quick rabbit trail. You said something about in the story, Dan, about the concept that just wasn't right for India, wasn't right for Northeast India, which is a bigger question altogether about the viability of super green solutions in the developing parts of the world. Mm-hmm. It's a technology-based business model, and I'm going to encourage our listeners, go to the website, check it out. It's some really cool stuff with neat environmental positivity to it. But you said, I just want to explore that, not about super green, but just the two of you together, quickly, your perspective on franchising in the developing world with a sort of a BAM focus, going to places that are very difficult to get to technologically, travel-wise, whatever. What is your current, and I know this is a little off the cuff, but what is your current thinking about that? Not for super green, but on the broader question of franchising in general.
Yeah, Mike, I think on my end, I think the concept has to fit the context. And we're not saying that super green solutions is not franchisable overseas, but what we are realizing is when we purchased the company, we saw that the overseas franchisees, they had no infrastructure, no vendor infrastructure, no sales channels, and none of it was developed. So that's what we realize also is this is not something, our concept cannot be done at a really small micro scale. It needs to be done more from a master franchise, quite a large scale. I do think that franchising is a viable solution, especially in undeveloped countries, but it has to make sense. So an example would be agricultural co-op that I helped to start in Uzbekistan in 2009. In a sense, we have 53 farmers involved in that. So I would say it's a hybrid model of a franchise in a sense. They didn't necessarily buy in; they bought in with their sweat equity, and they're paying a royalty back to a kingdom group that is planting churches in that country. So concept and context have to be right.
Yes. Well, and I think a good example of this, of my view, is actually what happened with Chick-fil-A and Hawaii, because for the longest time there was no Chick-fil-A in Hawaii, and the reason why was just logistically what it took to get product from mainland U.S. just to Hawaii to do their concept the way they were doing it. They didn't go there. I believe they're moving to Hawaii now, if my understanding is correct. But the point is, internationally, if you're going to do a franchise that is going to literally, because franchise means replicate it the exact same everywhere you do it. If you're going to do that, you need to have something that's not, so complex and doesn't have logistical, challenges that you can't replicate it everywhere. And so I believe that there are going to be concepts that are going to emerge in the BAM space that are going to be things that we can take to, even hard access countries. But I think my view is that it's probably going to turn out to be more of a service-based franchise so that you don't have all the logistical and product concerns that you would have as you went to the broader market.
No, and I appreciate what you guys are saying. And the reason I wanted to ask that is I think there are a lot of listeners, certainly to this podcast, that they're thinking franchise, and I'm a little concerned that they're going to think sort of monolithically. All franchises are the same. If you can expand it here, you can expand it there, versus being, Gary, you said it well, does the concept fit the context? And I know from my own experience in starting businesses in Central Asia that food service in particular And high tech in particular do not work well. Not yet. They may someday, but they don't today. And so I hear it as a little bit of not a warning, but just a words of wisdom to those who are thinking about franchising is they really need to do their due diligence. Now, back to the original question, Gary, before we took the rabbit trail. So Dan talked about what attracted him to Super Green Solutions. How about you?
Yeah, I think initially, it was the trust relationships that I had with Don, and then once, I've also known Dick and Stan for quite a long time, and did some training with Stan actually 10 years ago at an organization, some BAM training. But really, it was just looking at the concept. Yeah, I recognize renewable energy. Anything renewable energy is up and coming. I had some exposure on the application side to renewable energy for some of our agro concepts in China, in East Asia, and Central Asia. But when I met Dan and I heard his vision, to be really honest with you, Mike, it was compelling. So hearing the vision, hearing the heart of a man, realizing that we had such similar backgrounds in so many ways, and the reality for me was, how could this be at 57 years old and him 59? That we'd never met each other. We've literally been in the business world, me in a different role at PepsiCo while he was there. And it didn't make sense, but it did make sense in what I would say God's divine providence. So what I did when I was just looking at the business, I decided to do what I do, is I take things apart, and I sent Dan a very brief PowerPoint presentation. If I was looking at purchasing this company, this is probably what I would do. And that ended with a slide at the end, inviting myself to partner with him in the business. And so Dan can tell the rest of that story. But I think concept and the person, and I believe the greatest asset in any business or any ministry that I've been involved in is the people. It's never the money. It's always the people. So following Dan and the role that I'm in right now as COO has been, really a dream. It's a great leader and with a compelling vision.
We'll be right back after a short break. Third Path Initiative is your go-to site for accessible, affordable BAM training. Learn about the biblical foundations for business as mission, ethical capitalism, BAM strategies, and how to become a kingdom employee. It's all at thirdpathinitiative.com.
So you spent the first year, and I really respect this, Dan, my own background in franchising too, it tells me that you were right. You spent the first year sort of rebuilding, retooling, rebranding, like I say, getting it ready for prime time. And then you brought it back. So what's happened since then?
Well, we've done a couple things with the concept. So we are both a franchise and a corporate model, meaning that we are couple of things we changed. Before, the concept was single unit franchising. We decided to change it a little bit and also create what we call a master franchise opportunity, for major markets, and then for tier 2, tier 3 markets, single unit. And then we also decided to form a corporate strategy where we'll keep certain markets as corporate markets where we'll run branch offices. And the purpose in that really is profitability and viability, and also the ability to hone and continue to grow our concept in a controlled environment. In that sense, it will benefit the company financially, but it'll also benefit our franchisees. And as we create a pathway for innovative technology to come through on the corporate side, we can vet it, put it in the marketplace, give feedback, and then roll it out to our franchise community.
Yeah. And, we haven't touched on this yet, Mike, but, honestly, we could sit here and talk about business concepts all day. Gary and I love business. We love to work on business. We love working in business. But really, for us, the magic is in the passion that we have for Christ and the way the two blend together. It's the passion of business and the passion of Christ when they come together in a symbiotic way that it just does something to your soul, especially as two older guys like Garry and I that have been around for 40 years plus in the business world. And so for me, when we started this business, I shared with Garry, my life verse is Mark 10:45, which says, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. And so our model, right from the get-go, is not the typical corporate model of, the CEOs at the top and all the garbage rolls downhill, and you beat everybody up along the way to get your financial numbers. I need to be the chief servant in this company, and I need to love and serve and care for my people and make sure that I'm role modeling to them how I expect them to serve and care for the people that they serve in this organization. And honestly, I can tell you, and I get emotional just even saying this, that I have only dreamed my entire business career, because I got saved at the age of 14. So I've been saved for a long time. And my entire business career, while I would share the gospel with people and, try to live Christ in the marketplace, I could only dream, and not even probably do that we could create what we've seen God do in this company, because we have such a Christ culture built into this company that, we've built it in a way, I think, that is very loving and sensitive. It's not offensive to those that don't know Christ. In fact, every conversation when I first meet a prospective franchisee or a new employee that doesn't know Christ, what they hear out of my mouth is, hey, I just want you to know I'm a Christian businessman, and let me tell you why I share that. I'm not trying to be offensive. If you have a different faith, that's totally fine, but you won't understand this company if you don't understand that my faith as the CEO is what, kind of guides the servant heart behind the culture you'll find in this company. And I can just tell you, again, if we had hours, I could tell you stories of opportunities that Garry has had to minister to, people that are pursuing a franchise with us. And because they see the cultural difference here that they haven't seen in other organizations, Garry's been able to share Christ with them, and, many other stories that we could tell.
Yeah, Mike, one of the things that when Dan and I first met, I had talked to Dan about the concept of building a kingdom impact plan. And it's something that I've done overseas for quite a bit, and also with different American businesses as well. So literally, as we were looking and taking apart the business in January of 2021, we also wrote our first draft of this kingdom impact plan, which is in place. And actually, probably a plug for Don's book. It's Appendix C in Don's book. And so what is the kingdom impact plan? We wanted to have a guide. How are we going to impact the kingdom through our focused business practices, through our building intentional relationships, and also what is purposeful giving? One of the things that Dan and I both agreed upon is many people that start businesses that are kingdom oriented talk about, when I make money, I'm going to give money to the kingdom. We decided to pledge that money, that percent, before we even made a penny. And what does that mean? That means, thus far we've been involved in several things overseas, in Africa and in Middle East, and here domestically with organizations coming up like Habitat for Humanity. And we're excited. We're excited because we believe that we put the Lord first, and said, Dan says this very often, I'm following the real CEO of this company, and that's the Lord Jesus Christ. And he is, obviously, Dan is the functional CEO of Super Green Solutions in that sense, if you want to use that term. But I believe that the early success of our company and the midterm and long-term success is going to be because every single day we honor the Lord, or we strive to honor the Lord in our business practices and building intentional relationships between one another, as well as with vendors and even prospects. And also the fact that, we were bold to make that commitment, not just Dan and I, but our entire board was willing to make that kingdom commitment on the financial side of giving. And so those are some of the, I think, key ingredients to a successful company that's kingdom focused.
Yeah, I think as I'm listening, you guys are describing what I would almost call a textbook business's mission company. I think there's a little bit of a misconcept around that you have to cross an ocean to do business's mission. Mm-hmm. And my answer to that, and I would have espoused that in the beginning, because I'm all about the 1040 window and, getting to where the most of the unreached are. But I remember when it dawned on me one day, I was in Indonesia and I was talking to a Chinese furniture manufacturer, and just in my weird way of thinking, I thought, okay, so does this guy have to leave Jakarta and go overseas to do business as mission? And of course, the answer is no, right? It's right there. And so what you're describing, the attitudes, the beliefs, the practices, the openness, getting connected to people that will probably never darken the door of a church. They're seeing Christ in the way you do business. And I think that, if I really had to distill it down to its purest form, that's all business's mission really is. The geography of it, there may be strategic geographic decisions like the 1040 window, but being wherever you are, I mean, Christ is needed there and needs to be seen not only by people who won't go to church, but people go to church with expectations, and people put on their masks and they don't really see real people. And in business, you do. And so you guys are showing real people to real people. I think it's just beautiful.
Yeah, well, and Mike, you hit on one of my soapboxes, and I won't get on the soapbox for time's sake. But, really the scriptures teach the priesthood of believers. And so whether you're a nurse, whether you're a firefighter, whether you're a businessman, you need to be living Christ wherever you are. So that's just the basic, priesthood of believers. Now, where I think, and believe me, I'm very, very pro local church. So don't hear this the wrong way, right? But I think one of the things that I've seen in my 40 some years, in Christ, as well as being, on a pastoral staff of a great local church for 10 years, I think that there's an aura almost around business that we have in the church done a disservice. And I think it's hurt a lot of young business entrepreneurs, like I feel like I was, that, because a certain message is preached. And here's what I've heard and seen, in the evangelical church, is that the message to business people, even though you'll hear your, priesthood of believers and all, is, hey, God's blessed businessmen so they can make money and give money to missions, know? And I think that is so wrong. Like my appeal to, to any podcast listeners that you have that are young entrepreneurs is, no, God has a place for people that love Jesus in business, and he's gifted in a way where they have that entrepreneurial spirit, and they have the giftedness to go in that direction. In fact, Garry and I are looking for younger people that have that kind of a passion, that love Christ and want to learn business and make a difference for Christ in the business world. That's the message we need to be preaching, to the entrepreneurs. I mean, we got to get rid of this aura in the church, that business is just about making money to give to missions. The mission needs to happen in the business wherever it is.
You can get on this soapbox all day long as far as I'm concerned. You're singing my song too. Let me change a little direction here and ask, just as we start thinking about wrapping up this conversation, what's the future hold for you guys? What are you focused on in the next year or two?
Yeah. So, Mike, from an operational perspective, what we've seen as we redeveloped the concept and relaunched in that sense, that solar residential really is our prime revenue vertical, and also our prime kingdom vertical, because because we get right in front of the decision maker in the first meeting. So, from a revenue perspective, there's currently about 4 to 4.5% penetration in solar in the United States. We're seeing, even as last week, we're seeing some big infrastructure bills maybe being put forward to incentivize onboarding solar in the residential, especially, and also the commercial space. EV charging stations, just because of what we're seeing in the marketplace in the next few years. We decided to have that as our second vertical because it integrates well with our first vertical. But primarily those two together with the actual concept that we have, that is not our value proposition as a company, is we're coming in with a consultative view. So we walk in and let's just say we do what we call reduce and produce. I'll walk into your home and I'll walk through your home and figure out how to help you reduce some of your energy needs so that we can figure out what we need to produce. And that so what that does for us is it builds a long-term value customer, because we're adding value to the customer. We're not just simply coming in and selling something. And what does that do? That builds respect. It builds really trust, and it brings kingdom advantage. So when people ask us, we've had this happen numerous times already. where people ask us, why did you come in and like you saved me money here? Yeah, thank you for giving me for asking me that question. What's that question? So 1 Peter 3:15 question that we love, right? Always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who gives you a reason for the hope that lies within you. So with our Christian staff members, we focus on that. When people ask that question, why are you guys so different? Why didn't you just come into my home and try to sell me the solar array? The biggest, baddest solar array. We said no, because we want to make sure that we hold our heads up, and our brand is very important to us. So and I'll say all of that stems from the vision that Dan cast for Super Green Solutions at the beginning. We will do all things out of integrity and honor and respect for the client. And by doing that, I think the Lord will honor our growth.
Mike, if I could just maybe add one thing to that, and this is political, but it's going to be balanced political. You have, because of the industry we're in, you've got the ultra right and the ultra left, that are, this is a bunch of garbage, we're not affecting the environment. And then the opposite side that, we've got to get rid of fossil fuels because, that's, the thing that's destroying our world. Well, really what needs to happen is there needs to be a balanced approach. As we are good stewards of the resources God's entrusted us with, the world has been built on fossil fuels up until this time. And so as renewable energy is coming in, you can't get rid of fossil fuels, because that would mean most of us would have to stop driving our cars tomorrow because we can't afford a $60,000, car that runs on, electric, right? But the balance is that the fossil fuels are here and they're here to stay, at least for the foreseeable future. But we do have to start tapping into renewable energy and getting as much solar and an electrical vehicle infrastructure in place. And perhaps at some point in time, there will be enough supply from the renewable side that the fossil fuels can decrease, and help our environment in that way. But it needs to be a balanced approach, to how we go after this.
Yeah. Just tacking on to, there's an education component as well, for us. And so that's where we say we are, consulting, collaborating, and educating our clients. That's part of our business strategy. But it's also part of what we would say our kingdom strategy, because, we have clients now that have become friends of our salespeople. All right. It's not just a one and done type of thing. And that's what we want. So, it feels good. Mike, after all these years of living overseas, and, I talk a lot about quadruple bottom line, but to be really honest with you, the environmental bottom line piece, I personally have not done as much in that area. So that's honestly going back to one of the questions you asked earlier. The presentation of Super Green, I thought, wow, I can really, this industry, which is up and coming and here to stay for the foreseeable future, it's going to help me personally to make that impact in the environmental side. Every time we put a solar array in a home, we can sit there with that client and say, this is how many trees you've actually, planted in a carbon offset. And it feels good because God gave us this earth and he told us to protect it. But like Dan said, there's a transition. And it's going to be, a transition. It'll take a significant period of time, and we're thankful to be part of that.
No, and I think that's a great place for us to land this thing today. I'm of the conviction that Christians ought to be at the forefront of the environmental movement, not on the fringe, left or right. Keep all the media hype on both sides out of it, but looking at the fact that in the beginning, God gave this earth to us. And he said, I want you to take care of it.
Amen.
And I think, you're right, Gary, what you just said. I think a lot of businesses, mission companies really struggle with that fourth piece of the quadruple bottom line. They know how to make money. They know how to make disciples. They know how to make some certain societal impacts. Then they look around like, what am I going to do about the environment? And while you guys are dead center of that, it also brings some wisdom to folks who are trying to figure that out in their own business. I think that is unfortunately, Dan, you went there. Not that you went there. It's unfortunate that it's become so politicized that to be pro-environment must mean you hate the Constitution or you're not a patriot or some such nonsense as that, when in reality, the best sermon I ever heard on creation was a Presbyterian minister here in North Carolina who said that God built this incredible playground for us and then turned us loose in it to have fun, and we've destroyed it. And so, I really appreciate what you guys are doing. I appreciate the thinking. I hope that if you haven't done some already, you'll do some more speaking on it, more writing on it, to help believers, kingdom-minded believers, understand that part of the kingdom is, in fact, taking care of God's creation. He is honored when we do that. So, guys, last words to you, and then we'll call it quits for today. But we'll hook up again soon.
Mike, I just wanted to, one of the part of our kingdom plan is the term intentional relationships. Super Green at this point is not a major player in the solar residential space in the U.S. We're growing, and we're growing aggressively, which is great. But because we're in this space, and because Dan and I choose to be vocal, there's a couple different major industry experts. With large companies that we have now, because of being able to build relationships with them, having influence on them and the way they're doing solar in their own company. Mm-hmm. So it's not just about what we're doing inside of Super Green. Because we're in this place, God has allowed us to leverage relationships to speak into other industry people in our industry and have influence on their lives. And that, for me, is what Dan and I refer to as exponential impact. And we're excited to see what that that will bring in the future.
Amen. Well said.
Yeah, my final word would just be, again, our heart is to serve in the body of Christ, and God has ordained us to be in these positions for a reason. And so if there's anything at all that Garry and I could do for anybody in your listenership, they can reach out to us at info@supergreensolutions.com. And we would be happy to encourage them, pray for them, serve them in any way that we can, because again, ultimately it's about him and his kingdom. And that's what we're trying to do, is make a difference through this company for his kingdom. So thank you so much for letting us be a part of this with you.
Well, I had to, because if I didn't invite you, Garry would have invited himself, just like he did with you. So.
Yeah,
that's probably true.
But Mike, I want to say I'm probably the largest distributor of your book that you wrote when you were in Kyrgyzstan, because when I came across that, it had a great impact on me. So we do thank you for your service as well.
And Mike, thanks for all you do for the BAM movement. You've been for decades now, you've been a voice that's making a difference. And certainly it comes up all the time as I interact with BAM people. So thank you so much for all your contribution to the kingdom.
Well, I appreciate the encouragement. It is nice to know that our labor in the Lord is not in vain, right? Sometimes it feels like it is, but it isn't. So, all right, brothers, so much we could talk about. Thanks for spending the time. We will definitely be talking further. We need to get together in person and just with a microphone in the middle and just go and see what happens. But I appreciate very much the fact that you've been with us for this hour, and I hope our listeners will take advantage. Go to supergreensolutions.com, learn about the company. The site is a good site. It's very educational. Reach out to Garry and Dan, info@supergreensolutions.com. Just learn more. Don't let the media, either side, push you into ignorance on this matter. It's a God thing. So, guys, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Thanks for listening to the Business as Mission podcast. We invite you to become part of the story by supporting the BAM podcast at patreon.com/BAM Stories. There's a link in the notes with this episode. For more information, go to thirdpathinitiative.com or tryventure.com. Please share this podcast and give us a review wherever you listen. If you'd like to help with expenses and expansion of the Business as Mission podcast, you can become a donor through Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/BAM Stories. This podcast is brought to you by generous donors and sponsors. You can become one by going to patreon.com/BAM Stories.